Harry Houdini passed away more than 90 years ago. His mystique has never faded. The famed magician captured the imagination of the world. His death-defying stunts and performances still baffle modern magicians to this day. Before his death in 1926, the magician promised his wife Bess that he would try to communicate with her from beyond the grave. Bess held an annual séance for 10 years before finally abandoning the search in 1936. Fans and fellow magicians continued the séances as an annual Halloween tradition. Thus far, Houdini's spirit has not been contacted.
When I was a kid, about 7 years old, I learned my first magic trick, how to push a solid object through another solid object. My grandfather taught me the trick, and I was really interested. I wanted to know more, and typical of my parents, they said you go to the library, you check out books. And the first book I checked out was a book about a guy named Harry Houdini. And I read that he did all kinds of magic, whether it was close-up or stage, and he was very well known, of course, for his escapes. Which were daredevil escapes, that he would hang from someplace very high or be in a thing full of water for long periods of time. The street magicians who have their TV specials today, really everything that they do, they take from what Houdini did. But he was a very, very fine magician.
What I think he's even the best at, which he was one of the greatest promoters, I would even go as far as to say he's the first entertainment superstar, where it's beyond magic. If you think about it, it's almost 100 years since he died. After 100 years, he's one of the few entertainers that we still know the name of. Who could you think of? Any other kind of entertainment, music, anything that 100 years later you still know the name? Or if you go back 75 years, who do you know from 75 years ago? Houdini has surpassed all those people. And part of it was, yes, his magic was great. There are people that might argue he wasn't the greatest magician of the time, but doesn't matter. In the minds of everyone else, he was, and that's all that really matters.
He would do some very extreme things, like have himself, of course, completely tied up with handcuffs and chains, then put into a bag, put into a huge trunk, shipping trunk, and then dropped into the East River in New York, again with lots of press around to make sure that he got plenty of publicity, and he would miraculously escape. Now, he understood creating drama. So it wasn't an instantaneous escape. It would be underwater for what appeared to be a very long time before he finally came up, and people would get worried. He's not gonna make it, he's not gonna make it. And all of a sudden you'd see a bubble and a second air bubble, and then he came up, exhausted. But he was able to hold his breath underwater for evidently quite a long time.
It wasn't just in America that he was popular. It was all around the world. People knew the name Houdini. And if you think about that, no television in those days, there's no internet, no way to get your name out there, and he did it. He would basically go out, do these great escapes, and get people talking. The fact that he was able to internationally become a name is pretty incredible. Beyond him performing on the stage, he wanted to become a superstar. So when movies came out, he got into the movies, the silent films. He had his hand in everything because he wanted to be the king of the media. He wanted to be part of everything, and that was the next step.
Houdini was an avid collector of magical literature. In fact, a good story about Houdini was the fact that he would go around New York City. He didn't drive, so he had a chauffeur take him, and he would find magic books, and he would then come in the front door when he got home, and Bess did not share his enthusiasm for magical literature. So he would say, "Hi, Bess, I'm home," totally misdirecting her like a magician would do, and the chauffeur would go around the back door and sneak the books into his library.
Ladies and gentlemen, in introducing the water torture cell, although there is nothing supernatural about it, I am willing to forfeit the sum of $1,000 to anyone who can prove that it is possible to obtain air when I'm locked up in it after it has been filled with water.
That's where Houdini really excelled, was at escapes. He had great stamina and great enthusiasm for what he was doing, and he had a lot of knowledge of locks, and he was able by his strength often to get out of various types of manacles. We do have some film of him performing, but unfortunately it's such grainy film and such short clips that we really can't judge Houdini much as a magician, only from contemporary accounts of people who saw him, and they said he was only a mediocre magician, but he was a tremendous showman.
The room is filled with wonderful artifacts that actually belong to Houdini. Many things that may have belonged to Houdini and things that did belong. This is a poster of probably one of his most famous tricks, the metamorphosis illusion. And that is the trunk that Houdini and his wife Bessie used in this thing. And if you notice, that trunk is this trunk. This is the metamorphosis trunk, one of the trunks that Houdini got out of and switched places with Bessie Houdini. The straitjackets and the artifacts, the Houdini handcuffs, all of these pretty much came from other magicians who've donated things to the Magic Castle. But the straitjacket itself is one that Houdini escaped from. And Houdini was not a big man. He was very strong, very muscular, but he was not a tall person. And so you notice that the straitjacket is not a huge straitjacket. And one thing of particular interest is the milk can. Houdini could actually go in this can filled with milk, and they would lock it from the outside, and somehow he would get out of it. Now, we've looked at this milk can, and we don't know how he did it. And the Houdini milk can is one of the prize artifacts of the Houdini collection.
It is not meant that all men should understand all things, and that all men should be gifted in the same way. But there are a chosen few empowered to act as mediums for those who live in the world beyond, spirits, earnestly desiring to communicate their knowledge and help. For in this plane of existence, many things are hidden from us that to those who dwell in the world beyond are as clear as the sun's shining rays.
After Houdini's mother died, he was just extraordinarily upset. He had such a strong affinity for his mother, and he was hoping he could possibly reach her in the afterlife. So he went to various seances, to various spirit mediums, trying to reach his mother. In those days, spiritualism was very popular, much more so than now. And one by one, he saw these people were fakes. So he then decided to dedicate his life to exposing these spiritualistic frauds, because they were taking money from people.
He didn't believe in it, which to this day, quite often there are magicians that are very skeptical, me included, because you see how easy it is to fool people. And their money is being taken, and something that they believe in, they love their mother, they love their husband or wife who's passed away, and they're getting taken advantage of and losing money off of it. So Houdini wanted to go out there and show them that with trickery, he could do the same thing and prove them wrong.
And so he made it his passion to debunk all of these fakes because he felt that it was terrible that they were taking people's money. Some people didn't mind, I guess, because they just wanted the hope that they were going to be able to communicate with the people from their lives who were dead. But he just felt that this was a terrible thing. And he actually went to Washington, D.C. and testified in 1926 against all of this stuff that was going on. He wanted it to be made illegal.
Houdini and Bess had a pact that whichever one survived the other would have a seance and try to bring the other one back and make contact within the spirit world. And so Houdini died first on Halloween of 1926. So for 10 consecutive years, Bess would have a seance where she would try to bring Houdini's spirit back with his seance, and of course he never came back.
It is the spirit of Houdini we wish to contact. We have waited, Houdini, oh, so long. Never have you been able to present the evidence you promised. And now, this is a night of nights. Levitate the table, move it. Lift the table, move it, rap on it. Spell out a code, Harry, please.
This is an invitation to the final Houdini seance, and there are very few people that got these invitations. It was held on the roof of the Knickerbocker Hotel here in Hollywood in 1936. That was 10 years after Houdini died. And the interesting thing about the final Houdini seance is it was the last attempt. They had a pact that Mrs. Houdini would try to contact Houdini from the great beyond for every year on the anniversary of his death, which was interesting because it was Halloween. And Houdini, a lot of people thought he had just hung around till Halloween because it was good publicity. Houdini was kind of like that. But they held a seance every anniversary of his death for 10 years. And Houdini never came back. And the reason they knew he never came back is they had a code word, a code that only Mrs. Houdini and Harry Houdini knew. And people would say they brought back Houdini, but he never said that word, and Mrs. Houdini was not convinced. On the night of the final Houdini seance on the roof of the Knickerbocker Hotel here in Hollywood, they had about 200 people. They had an inner circle. My dad was part of that inner circle. And they cajoled and cajoled, but Houdini never came back. It was a beautiful starlit night here in Hollywood in October 31st, Halloween. And the interesting thing about it is Mrs. Houdini came up after the seance and at the end of the seance and said, "Houdini did not come back to me or to anyone. I now reverently turn out the light." And with that, she turned out the little light that had been over his picture for all these years. And at that point, it started to rain. And it rained just long enough to douse everybody on the top of the Knickerbocker Hotel. And the interesting thing about that is it only rained in Hollywood. It didn't rain anyplace else.
Mary,
Yes, madame.
there will be no more seances, Mary.
Oh, I'm so sorry. But they've proven a failure.
But they haven't. Not exactly. Mary, you knew my husband a long time.
Oh, yes, madame.
And you remember what he always said about these things?
That it was impossible for the dead to return.
This proves he was right. For if it would have been possible, I would have had some sign from him in the past 10 years. Well, that is over. But I would have loved to have talked with him just once.
Are we going to make contact tonight with Harry Houdini, famous magician? We're at a seance right now. Something very familiar here in Petaluma, at least for almost 50 years.
It has become a bit of a tradition thanks to the gentleman we're about to introduce you to. You, of course, are already familiar with Harry Houdini, best known as a magician and an escape artist. But for millions of people, he came to represent a whole lot more than that. He escaped from poverty, he escaped from oppression, one of the most famous immigrants to come to this country, and of course his reputation continues to endure to this day. Bill, you have been, as Malou said, for the last 50 years, trying to conjure his spirit up here in Petaluma. How come?
Well, it's a great challenge. We still hope we're going to do it. We're not going to give up. We're going to go for another 100 years.
The seances came about mainly because of Bill Sabranus. Bill, and I can't imagine how he did this. For years, he wrote a daily column in the Argus Courier in Petaluma. And he was very interested in this seance thing. Bill also was the one that had begun the wrist wrestling thing in Petaluma.
Bill Sabranus was a really remarkable person, and the way that he was remarkable was how he could talk to anybody. He would be interested in anyone's story. And so he would get people interested about the seance, at least this is what he did with me, because he was interested in what I thought about it and how had I ever thought of this kind of thing.
The very first one that we held was in the home of one of our members in our magic group, this fellow, Gene Personette, lived in Santa Rosa, and we held it there at his home. Before the seance, the main thing would be getting the main table we were going to use ready, get our regalia out there, the handcuffs and things, and in place, and get some chairs around it. As far as the people that participated, we tried to kind of leave that up to the people that were there. You know, some people were interested in participating, others preferred to stand back and just be a spectator. And so the group was basically volunteer, and there was no point in putting a person in a position that they didn't want to be in. That wouldn't help us or them or anybody. And then we'd move it each year to a new location, and that was a little tricky because we never publicized where it would be ahead of time, because it was normally in a private situation, either a home or some club building or whatever.
Throughout the years, because of the Phoenix's reputation as a haunted house, as a haunted place, people would come through and ask if they could do ghost hunts. Few of the psychics that had been through, that had been drawn to this place, had told me the same thing. We'd like to come in after a fairly busy night, when there was still energy floating around from the people that had been in for that night. They felt that would draw the energy even closer to us. Bill had decided that, it was going to be at midnight, and gee, Bill, how much setup do you need? Should we cancel the show that night and just give you the building? No. We want to come and do it after a movie. Perfect. So we did it after a movie, I recall that. Movie finished, screen raised, we put a table down, and on the table, Bill and Nauman, and a couple of their friends had placed a bunch of artifacts that had been related to Houdini. It included the inner circle of 13 people at the table, would sit around the table and hold hands, and then anybody that wanted to could crowd around and be up on the stage behind the 13. Midnight strikes, dead silence, and we sit for 13 minutes holding hands, thinking about Harry Houdini, and that is a long time. That's a long 13 minutes. That's what I remember the most about it.
Over a period of time, there were more people became interested, and the group always got bigger. Probably one of the most interesting was one of our very early seances we held at the Wax Museum at Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco, which was a great setting because you've got all these exhibits. It was quite a good-sized group. The problem was you never wanted to create too big an audience because it was a problem to control, to try to keep this thing making sense. If you got a whole bunch of people and a bunch of noise, it just didn't work. And Fred was able to set up a seance for us one year in a graveyard on the east side of Santa Rosa, an old one. Now, I don't know how many years it had been there, but one of the people that's in that cemetery is Robert Ripley, the originator of the Believe It or Not column. Fortunately, we picked a night that turned out to be a very good night. A little cool maybe, but other than that, pretty well perfect. And of course the setting was, you couldn't really improve on the setting. One of our members had a friend, and he put together a costume. He was the Headless Horseman, which fit in, but we held it till the end because it didn't seem like the appropriate thing to be doing beforehand. It was fun, but you didn't want people to feel like they were attending a big joke.
A guy rode by, after it was a gag, a guy rode by on a horse dressed as the Headless Horseman. And he was real enough to freak everybody out initially. It was in '70, I think it was.
Yeah, the seances were held in primarily these wonderful old Victorian mansions in Sonoma County. And Houdini lived in the latter part of the Victorian era, so it was very fitting that you would hold the seances in these Victorian mansions. There's quite a few of them in Sonoma County. They were really great at finding perfect locations to hold these seances.
Well, the McDonald Mansion, that was probably the ultimate experience that I had with the Houdini seances. It's a gorgeous, historical, huge Victorian mansion. They used it in 1960 to film Pollyanna. And, it's just elegant. It's completely elegant. And it's very evocative of the age in which Houdini lived and in which he and Bess were probably the happiest. It puts people in the right frame of mind. It puts people into the past and into the possibilities of things.
Well, he would certainly write it up before. However, there was never any indication in his columns as to where it would be. And that didn't turn out to be a problem because anybody who was really interested was certainly free to contact him before. And, if it was a legitimate contact, he would be able to provide them with the information they needed and as to where they needed to be.
Bill Sobranis always wanted to take the seances to Transylvania, and I would have loved to have gone to Transylvania, to the home of Dracula. Dracula actually did exist, and I know that some people always thought that Dracula was just a myth, but it was based on an actual person, and there is a castle there. And it would have been really interesting to go to this castle, which has so much energy and so much paranormal activity already happening there, and then to have that as a space for the Houdini seance. I would have enjoyed going, and Bill would have loved it.
I remember most was the one that was over on B Street, and I forget the woman's name that owned the house there. I think they still live there. And that seance was fun because I invited my daughter, who at the time was, I think, maybe 14, 13 years old. And she was very excited because the seances happen at midnight. So she would go out for trick-or-treating, Halloween, and then come home and then wait for a couple hours till midnight. And we would walk over there. So that was fun. I also remember that was the only one that I actually felt like I saw or felt the presence. And being a skeptic, I thought about, well, I probably shouldn't tell anybody that I thought I saw someone, So, but I did. I said, yeah, they interview you at the end, what did you experience? And they have somebody write all this down. And then Bill usually reports on it in the Argus Courier. But I did, when you're quiet, it's kind of meditating, A lot of things come into my mind, but I had a definite sense that somebody was walking around outside. He was dressed in like 1940s outfit and didn't want to come in, but was just walking around.
We weren't trying to put words in anybody's mouth. We make sure that in the actual process of this, that everybody was completely involved and paying attention, and that there was no fooling around. No stunts were created or displayed in the course of the seance. There wasn't any takeaway from the authenticity of it. I can't honestly say that anyone ever came up with anything that really connected their feelings with the message that had originally been established by Mr. and Mrs. Houdini. I mean, it was impressive just because of the conditions. But nobody could ever say, well, I got this picture of this word. That never happened.
I think it's just a great historical event. I think it's a great for magic in the area, and I think just a local history and local color. I think it's a great thing to remind people that that history is here. Actually, I'm very excited that the seances are happening here because there's a direct connection to Houdini through William Alstrad, who actually worked with Houdini and then helped the Sonoma seances take place, which really makes them more legitimate, I think, than just other seances going on around the country. So there's a real Houdini connection here.
Bill and the Houdini seance was such a part of Petaluma for me. When he had finally asked, because I was kind of hoping he would. Every year we talk about it, and finally when he asked, I was thrilled to be a part of the Houdini seance, and Houdini had performed here, and to be a part of Bill Sobranis' adventure was a lot for me, and very exciting. So it was huge. It was very much a Petaluma event.
I don't know how I would describe it, not savoir-faire, but he brought something to the seance that really added to it, because he tended to want to have people there that were interesting people. I don't know how much he picked and chose who could be there, but my sense was that everybody that got an invite was somebody that he had heard their story and thought that they were somebody that was interesting to go and talk to other people. And I was always impressed. I know that when he did die and people wondered what was going to happen to the seance, I said, I can't do this. I'm not the right person to do it. But people were asking, who's going to do this seance next year? Who's going to do it? It was a sad thing that it just stopped. That's an indication of how much energy Bill put into it. Seance is when Bill died, the seance died.
Today, all over the world, on the anniversary of his death, people are still having these seances. Do they really want to talk to him? Maybe some do. I think it's important that you go after it, and if you're going to do it and give it an honest try. But I think more than anything else, every magician since Houdini's death, they've gone out and done it because they want the same publicity. It's a great way, and it's great. That's what Houdini did. I think that's what Houdini would have wanted. People this far after his death still talking about him, it's fantastic.